So I had 36 kids in my classroom, and they were the lowest performing kids academically. And every day it was just like a struggle. I mean, it was just utter chaos. My second and third year, we took a group of kids who were performing on average at like the 13th percentile on nationally recognized standardized tests. And by the end of that second year with us, the majority of them were on grade level.
How? How did you do that?
It was crazy. It took a minute, right? So at first, parents were like, this is too much. What are you doing? We know what we need to do in public education in this country, and we're just refusing to do it.
Welcome back to the OpenEd podcast. I am Isaac Morehouse, and I am here with my favorite co-host, Matt Bowman.
Hey, Isaac.
Matt, how are you?
Doing great. Great to be with you today.
If you're listening and not watching on video, Matt has the world's biggest grin on his face, even bigger grin than the usual Matt Bowman grin, because today we are joined by an education legend. Michelle Rhee is here with us, and we're going to get into her story. But Michelle, welcome to the OpenEd podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Absolutely. So just for those listening, if you're not familiar, Michelle has an extensive history in and around education. She cut her teeth with Teach for America. She became the CEO of the New Teacher Project for many years. She was the chancellor of the Washington, D.C. Public Schools. She founded Students First. And now she is with a venture capital firm, which seems like an interesting and unexpected turn. I think we'll get into that a little bit. But Michelle, I want to just start with going way back to your own education experience. Growing up as a kid, what kind of education did you have? And what did those early years do in terms of kind of setting the stage for how you view education and what happened later in your career?
So I am the child of immigrants, Korean immigrants at that. And so it will be unsurprising to anyone that education was just the number one priority in our household. My parents moved to this country because they wanted to live the American dream. But from a cultural perspective, it was very much like the way that you succeed in life is you get a great education. So that was always the focus in our household. We were always expected to do extraordinarily well in school. When we didn't, we heard about it. I went to public school through sixth grade and then transitioned to a private school in Toledo, Ohio, and really got a first-rate education. I will say I was incredibly well prepared for the rigors of college. So that's that was a little bit about us. Like people make the joke all of the time that, when you're an Asian and you come home with a B, the parents will say, you're not a Bijan, you're an Asian. That was exactly the mindset of my parents. Like, you came home with an A. I was like, why is this not an A plus? That sort of vibe.
It's so interesting. First, as a Michigander, I'm sorry that you grew up in Ohio, but I'm sure we can
fisticuffs on that one.
It's so interesting because I have my own education experience is so far removed from that in terms of like the, heavy duty focus on academics and getting an A. I mean, my parents were, they wanted us to do our best and do well. I was mostly homeschooled, but what always strikes me is because I grew up with some people like that and some on the opposite end of the spectrum. And it doesn't always translate the way you would think into later life success. Like people who had a ton of academic focus, they almost always go to college and do well in college. But when you look 10 years after college at like what happens with people's careers, the really heavy academic or grade focused in the early years, the earlier, the less it translates. Doesn't always map that well. And versus some people who just kind of like struggled in school, didn't do well. I'm curious what you think of that, because there's clearly something you took from your parents being so focused on that rigor, but knowing enough about you with all of your interest in education reform, I'm curious, is that an over focus? Is there a problem there? Or are there things that are missed with that focus on the academic grades?
Yeah. So it's interesting because, growing up, so first of all, I'm not an intellectual. And I did well in school, but I didn't do extraordinarily well. It was never really good enough for my mom, right? And she always used to sort of say, well, why can't you be like this Korean kid over here or that one over there. I won't name names to embarrass them. And so I grew up sort of in that kind of environment. And what's interesting is that some of those kids like flamed out really early, right? Or aren't particularly doing well now. And I think that one of the differentiators for me is the fact that my dad was very different from most traditional Korean men of his generation and age. He is very service oriented, right? So he was a physician, but my parents met because my mother was a social worker, my dad was a physician, and they like went and volunteered in some poor Korean village for the summer, that kind of thing. And he really instilled that sense of like sort of civic responsibility to us. And when I said I was going to join Teach for America as an example, my mother was like, "Abso-freaking-lutely not. You're not going to go teach. Like, we didn't send you to an Ivy League college to go teach public school in Baltimore." And so she was adamantly opposed to it. And my dad, after hearing everything, was like, "She's going to go. She's going to do this. This is a good thing to do." And so I think because I had that balance, I grew up with, a lot of experiences, volunteering, just seeing how other people lived their lives. And I think it gave me a different sense of perspective and like that social justice gene, I guess, that my dad had, was always a part of the equation for me.
I had probably my best experiences in my youth were all on most summers I did various humanitarian trips to various countries and places that were very, very impoverished, and just the perspective shift and the understanding and the questions that it forces you to ask about how the world works and just getting outside of your own little experience were absolutely second to none. So I can totally share that. I'm curious, and Matt, I actually don't think I've asked you this either. When you came out of college, or maybe it was in college, at what point, Michelle, did you know I want to teach? Like, what sparked the interest in teaching? Did you always know that, or did you stumble into it?
So for my entire life, I have always liked kids more than adults. So, when I was young, I would babysit, I would volunteer in, my high school boyfriend's mother was a elementary school teacher. I volunteered in her classroom. I'd work at summer camps, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I also, knew that teaching was not sort of perceived by society to be, the kind of occupation that you were supposed to go into if you were a high achiever. And so never really thought about teaching as a career. But when I was in college, I learned about Teach for America, and I thought, okay, well, this makes sense for me because it's just a short stint, right? But it's something that I know I could be good at, and I would want to do. And so that was sort of the gateway in for me. But then once I had that experience in Teach for America, I knew I was going to be sort of in it for the long run.
Can you tell me what that was like? So you come out, you join Teach for America. I think you were in Baltimore, right? You went to the Baltimore schools. I'm guessing that this was not an easy thing to step into. Like, what was the, when you first hit the ground running there, like, was it overwhelming? What, just give me your take. Cause I have to imagine there were moments where you were like, what am I doing? Can I make it through?
I had one of the toughest first year of teaching experiences in probably in my core year. I was assigned to a third grade classroom at one of the worst performing elementary schools in Baltimore, Harlem Park Elementary School. There were 4 sections. Sorry, I started in second grade and then I went to third. So I started in second grade. There were 4 sections of second graders, and they were tracked. Back then, there was tracking. They were tracked by both academics and behavior. And I was assigned to track 4. So I had 36 kids in my classroom, and they were the lowest performing kids academically and the worst
Behavioral.
And so you could only they freaking ate me for lunch. And some of the lowest moments in my life were in that classroom. I remember one time I got so frustrated with the kids. I was like, do you want me to just leave and go teach some rich kid somewhere? And this kid looked at me and he was like, if you want to. I was like, what are you talking about, lady? You know, I mean, there were a couple of parents who were super savvy who pulled their kids out of my classroom. It was that bad. I mean, it was just utter chaos. And every day it was just like a struggle. But a few things like really changed the trajectory of like how that year went. And the summer between my first and second year, I was like, I am not going to let 8-year-olds run me out of town. Like, this is ridiculous. And so I spent the entire summer like planning. I was going to these PD sessions, etc. A colleague of mine and I decided that we were going to bring um, all of our kids from both sections into one classroom together and sort of team teach. And we did that. My second and third year, we had this group of basically 60 kids that we team taught, and we looped with them. So we took them through their second and third grade year, and it was wildly different. So much so that by the time I left, some of those same parents were like, "Wait, where are you going? We got like some other kids that you need to be here to teach our younger kids." So it really sort of was a 180-degree turn in terms of my, from what I was doing my first year, which was a disaster, to when I left.
Did you stay? Is Teach for America? I thought it was like a 1-year minimum.
It's
Is it
2-year minimum?
okay? But you stayed beyond that. You stayed for
I
3 years.
did, because I took that 2-year commitment to mean 2 good years, and my first one was a failure that I was like, I gotta be here at least for 1 more year.
Was it at that point, in that 3-year experience, is that when you started to become more interested in education reform as a whole? Like, okay, what is leading this to happen? What is going on with the system, at large? What sparked that? Or was there books or conversations or people that you ran into that got you excited about that?
Yeah, I mean, that experience, my second and third year, we took a group of kids who were performing on average at like the 13th percentile on nationally recognized standardized tests. And by the end of that second year with us, so my third year of teaching, the majority of them were on grade level.
How did you do that?
It was crazy. We we kept the kids after school. We gave them 2 hours of homework a night. Because for us, we were like, well, when you go home, it's not like our students were then going to soccer practice and piano lessons and that sort of thing. They were just going to go home and sitting on the stoop all afternoon. So we thought, well, do something constructive, and we got a lot of ground to catch up on here academically. And we got them really invested in their academics and doing well. We got the it took a minute, right? So at first, parents were like, "This is too much. What are you doing? This is, you're asking for too much." But as time went on, I think they saw the progress their kids were making. They saw how proud the kids were of what they were accomplishing. And so by the end, like they were fully in it as well. And I think through that experience, what I realized was that, because, the environment that these kids were growing up in, that did not change. Their healthcare plans, the food they were eating, who their parents were, et cetera, like none of that changed. What changed were the adults who were in front of them every single day in the classroom and what we were doing with that time. And so it really convinced me that the public education system was not working for the kids who needed it to work the most. And I thought I juxtaposed that to my experience in private school, where some kids who were absolute jokers, like didn't work hard, weren't particularly bright, would go on to college, and I knew were going to be successful because they, inherit their father's company or what have you. And I was looking at my students every day they had such tremendous promise and aptitude, like they were knocking it out of the park, right? And I was thinking, but their life chances and their life outcomes are not really going to be driven based on like the American ideals of like, if you work hard and do the right thing, then you can live the American dream. I actually knew that wasn't the case for a lot of my kids. And that really bugged the crap out of me. And I wanted to do something that was going to fix that.
It's so
Hey,
interesting.
Isaac, I have a quick question just
Yeah, go
on
ahead.
The looping, I love the idea of teachers staying with a group of kids multi-year. I even love a multi-age group where they, come in and rotate around. Was that a district standard that they were already doing? Did you ask for that? Like how did that
Yeah.
policy happen?
No, that was just this random brainchild that my co-teacher, uh, Michelle Jacobs and I had. We just had this idea like, okay, this is what we're going to do because she was much stronger in teaching reading and I was stronger in teaching math. And so we were like, if all 60 of the kids could get reading from her and math, reading led by her and math led by me, like the kids are going to end up doing better. So we asked our principal, this phenomenal woman by the name of Linda Carter, and she was like, "What do you want to do?" And we're like, "Yeah, we're gonna jam all the kids into one classroom, and we're gonna have this like rotational model, right?" And she's like, "Okay." I mean, she was open to innovation and she was bought into what we were doing. And so the interesting thing about that was that and the reason why I think looping is so good is because that second year, like that's when we saw like
Yeah.
massive acceleration, right? We didn't have to spend the first month of school learning each other and all this stuff. Like those kids knew exactly what the program looked like. And it's funny, one thing that people don't know. So my school was part of a really early experiment that Baltimore City embarked on way back in the day. Kurt Schmoke was the mayor of Baltimore, and he hired an outside private company called Education Alternatives Incorporated to take over 12 of the city's like lowest performing schools. So he's like way ahead of his time back then. And my school was one of those schools. And so they were trying to like implement this model, and none of the teachers at my school were particularly interested in implementing. But I didn't know any better, right? I didn't know anything. I didn't know any better, so I was like, I'll do it. And so I was actually, implementing this. One of the things they taught us was an old school sort of program called calendar math, and the idea was you teach kids math skills through like this sort of whole calendar setup. And so I did that. And it was great. The kids loved it. And one day, someone came into the classroom. And they were like, "Miss Rhee, we need you over here." So I went to the door and I told one of my top students, I was like, "Jeffrey, take over for me." And by the time I came back, I was watching this kid and he literally was going through the entire like thing of what I did every morning down to like when I would ask the kids, "What's the weather?" Like I noticed that like I opened the window and he opened the window as he was asking it. And so that structure, right? The routine, it was like ingrained in the kids and it just helped them, right? In everything because for some of them, like their worlds outside of school were just like so chaotic and so unpredictable and whatever that they really like the structure, the predictability, and the consistency, they just thrived in that environment.
It's funny you mentioned staying with students. I have never actually had this thought before, but it just occurred to me, if you're a fan of sports at the pro level or even at the college level, you might hear sometimes someone say, "Oh, well, one of the reasons this quarterback has really struggled is he's had a new coach every year for the last 3 years in a row." Can you imagine trying to start over, learning a new offense? You're thinking, kids have new teachers every single year. That's like that inability to get that longer term. That's just such an interesting observation. Is there more of that? Like, has that become more popular since then?
I don't think it's typically a thing that people do. I mean, the multi-age grouping piece, that's something that's sort of a Montessori concept, and we didn't do that. But the notion of sort of looping with kids, I don't think it's something that has ever really like gained a ton of popularity. But people who have done it, both on the family side and on the teacher side, they swear by it. They're like, yes, this is the way to go.
Isaac, you might not know, I was in a experimental K-1-2 in a public school. I had the same teacher, K-1-2, and she loved it. She said it was the best thing for kids, for families, but the district, organization, the teachers thought it was they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to learn multi-age, curriculum. And so it only lasted like 4 or 5 years, but I was 3 of those years. So it was super fun. I really, look, I didn't realize it was such a unique thing until I realized nobody's doing that. And I thought that was in the 70s. And why aren't we doing more of that, for sure?
The other thought I had, you were talking about the kids, one of the reasons that they were successful is you demanded more of them and they had more homework and they had more. And it's interesting because Matt and I talk about often, and I talk to people all the time, that a lot of kids today, I think, have too much structured time, too much homework, their whole day, everything is full between sports and homework and mobile. And one of the hard things for a lot of those parents, like especially where I live now, for example, it's this rat race. Everybody's trying to do the next best thing, and it's like, hey, back off a little bit, give your kids a little bit of room to breathe, a little bit to be kids. But as any of these things, it's not a universal one-stop solution. In this case, when the rest of their life is totally unstructured and chaotic, more structure and more homework and more academic demands were actually what they needed. And it's just a good reminder that it's like, it's not just one way or the other.
That's right. I think the context matters. But to your point, I just finished reading The Anxious Generation. And afterwards I was like, oh my gosh, I like ruined my kids with all this stuff. But it really does make me think about such stark differences between when we were growing up, right? Where we'd come home from school, nobody was there. We'd go out and do whatever in the
Yeah,
woods.
you ride your bikes around as long as you're home at dark,
Yeah. But you got bullied, you watched your little brother get beat up, all those things. I mean, but that's, Hate's point in all this is like, yeah, you have to live through some of that stuff. And that's what builds resilience and character and, um, grit and all that sort of stuff. And I think that's right. I think when we are with some of our kids like structuring things way too much and such that when that structure is not there, they're like, oh my god, what do I do, and they have anxiety about it. Like, that's a problem.
Yeah. So I want to jump ahead. So you did Teach for America. I know you had 10 years, the New Teacher Project. Then you became the chancellor of Washington, D.C. public schools. So now finally you get to do all the things you want to do and put everything in place and reform everything, right? Super easy.
Super easy. Yeah. That's right. So I'd run the New Teacher Project for 10 years. And during those 10 years, we worked with most of the large urban school districts in the nation. And, my staff and I were always so frustrated. We're like, oh, why isn't the superintendent doing this? Why isn't the head of HR doing that? And we saw the promise and potential of what could be if only, the district was doing what they should have been doing in our mind. And so when I had the opportunity to take the job, the sort of overarching driving factor for me was like, you got to put your money where your mouth is, right? You're going to be this consultant type person who's just telling people what to do versus actually like doing it yourself. So it was just a tremendous, it was really the opportunity of a lifetime, right? To be able to be in a mayoral control structure with the most supportive, unbelievable mayor you possibly could have in Adrian Fenty. So bought into like what needed to happen and was unapologetic about just like go, go, go. And not having to deal with a school board, being in this position where we were a city state. So it wasn't, like there were, state regulations out there that we needed to follow that were going to kind of stymie what we wanted to do. So really it was like the perfect storm of a situation that sort of led to what we were able to do there.
And give me in a nutshell, what were you able to do there? And were there things that you wanted to do that you were not able to do?
So in a quick nutshell, we took the district when we took over the district in 2007. It was the lowest performing school district in the nation. It was the only school district that was on high risk status with the U.S. Department of Education, mostly for the misuse of federal funds. 8% of the kids were on grade level in mathematics in the eighth grade at the time. So literally, the good thing for me was the bar was the floor, right?
Yeah.
Like there was nowhere to go but up. But we went from that situation to by the time we left, DC Public Schools was leading the nation in gains on the NAEP exam. And there was no one silver bullet in terms of like how we did that. There was a lot of work that went into it, and a great team that helped to drive that. But I'd say some of the main components of what we did were, we put in place a new evaluation system, and that evaluation system was distinguished by the fact that a large portion of how teachers were going to be um, evaluated was based on growth and student achievement. Um, and then we put in place a compensation system that rewarded the most effective teachers.
Did you get a lot of pushback for that?
Oh my gosh. That was a hard fought battle. I mean, there were a lot of battles in terms of closing schools and this, that, and the other thing, but the teachers union contracts was the toughest. But we were able to get through it largely because of the leadership of a guy by the name of George Parker, who was the teachers union president at the time.
Mm.
And he was super unusual for a teachers union leader. He understood what we were trying to do. He was aligned in terms of like student achievement needing to be at the sort of top of the priority list. And he ended up like Adrian, both of them ended up not getting reelected for another term after we implemented all of this. But without his leadership, we would not have been able to put that contract in place.
What was that year span? 2007, how many years?
So I was there for about 3.5 years. So
Mhm.
2007, middle of 2007 to the end of 2010. And then
Yeah,
after that, my successor, Kaya Henderson, who was fantastic because she was there with me during the whole first 3.5 years and stayed for another 5 years after that as chancellor. And that consistency also, like you can't underestimate. It just like teachers and having to learn a new teacher, superintendents is the same way. It's like you bring in a new superintendent, they want to throw away all the old plans and create their new strategic plan and all that kind of stuff. And Kai didn't have to do all of that because she had been there with me from the get-go. And so she was able to just like keep going. And she's so amazing. She does a lot, did a lot of things way better than I did. And some of those things that we weren't able to do in the first term, she was able to execute in the second term. And I think that just consistent, hard-nosed driving to the outcomes for that long was what allowed DC to kind of just maintain the momentum. And that momentum continued through the pandemic.
Did lots of other districts start to emulate what you're doing? I mean, to go from the bottom to the top in a 3-year span, I'm sure was a wake-up call to a lot of people. What did some of those reforms start to take off in other districts across the country?
Not really. And it's funny because people who aren't in education, like sometimes they'll see the data and they're like, well, why didn't everybody just do those things? I'm like, because it was hard. And, you know, my boss didn't get reelected and neither is George Parker, right? I mean, the reality is that the only reason we were able to do what we did in DC was because of the mayoral control and specifically because of the kind of mayor that Adrian Fetty was. So, that's a hard thing in and of itself to replicate. But knowing for other elected officials who are thinking about like making education their top priority, it was tough because Adrian was sort of like the cautionary tale, right? Of like, this is what happens if you take this hard stance and you do this aggressively. And so there were some folks who were like, well, we want to do what DC did. We just want to do it nicer. Some people called it like, DC light. But
so here's the pitch. If conditions are perfect, You'll have 3 years of absolute hell, and then you'll lose your job. Who's signing up?
Well, who wouldn't want to do that, right?
Well, I need to insert here because we share this in the book, and I don't want to take it down a very pessimistic route. But both political parties want bad test scores. Both benefit. The right have advocated for bad test scores in a subtle way to justify, privatization and choice. The left have always advocated for bad test scores so they could demand more funding for schools. So it's interesting that why didn't people replicate the success? There's pressure to not have great test scores because there's reasons on the political sides to advocate for those things. So anyway, that's a whole different discussion, but it's really interesting that what your success was not replicated and it was feared, right? And so it was really interesting how some of that evolved. So anyway, continue.
To say that like some good things didn't. I mean, what they did in New Orleans, what they did, my ex-husband in the state of Tennessee, a deputy of mine, Carrie Wright, has since taken over the state of Mississippi, and she did amazing things there. So there's some, there are some bright spots here and there, but in terms of like the whole hog like model of what we utilized, that was never duplicated, and I think I get why not. But all of that made me super it turned me into this curmudgeon, right? Because I got to the point where I was like, you know what? We know what we need to do in public education in this country, and we're just refusing to do it. And so, it's never going to change. That was my mindset for a good while. And then I sort of came into this into this world that I'm in now in venture capital, and I have like regained my optimism that I lost. So that's one of the main things of what I love about my current job is like I can once again be like, okay, we can do this. Let's go.
Well, yeah. Tell me what. I totally understand what would make you just start to feel deflated and say, I need something different. But I guess 2-part question. How did what made venture capital the thing that took you out of education, and why did you go that direction? And then what made you start to get interested again and start to look at the education space again and have a little bit more of that optimism? Was it just a little bit of time away was what you needed, or has something shifted in the world?
No. So I completely left education in about 2018 because I was so fed up. And also I was like, I am probably more harmful to the dynamic right now than I am helpful. Because people would evoke my name and like, oh, people like Michelle Rhee want to evaluate teachers solely on the basis of test scores, stuff like that, which was not true, but it didn't matter, right? It was an effective scare tactic. So I was like, let me just remove myself from this situation. And then in 2020, a colleague of mine from the education space, she had successfully co-founded a tech startup, and she had a successful exit from that. She called me one day, Jimena Hartzog, wonderful woman, and she said, "Hey, I have this idea for this new company." It was the notion was we need to bring the apprenticeship model into the modern day. And she had implemented one herself at her prior tech company, and she was like, "I want to build a software platform that helps companies to start and manage apprenticeship programs." And I was like, "Oh, that sounds so great." I was like, "Good luck, girl. Let me know what you need, how I can help." She's like, "No, I want you to start this with me." And I'm like, "I don't know anything about the startup world. I don't know." She's like, no, we can do this. So my husband said to me, "I think you got one more big thing in you, babe." Like, oh. And so I entered the startup world, and we built Build Within, and it was like a tremendous experience, a tremendous learning experience for me. I left there after about 3 years and thought I was going to take a little bit of a hiatus. And then Roland called me. So Roland Fryer and I have been friends since 2007, when he was a 27-year-old, like just had become the youngest ever Black tenured professor at Harvard. And I was, this young gun chancellor. And we worked on a project together in DC public schools around paying kids to do well in school. which by the way was successful. And so we've known each other ever since then. So he calls me and he's like, "Hey, you should join us, at EO Ventures. We just raised this $100 million fund, and you should run a fund within the fund that is focused on education investments." And I was like, "No, thank you. I'm out of education. I love being out. I never want to get back in." And I said, "Well, maybe something to do with workforce development." And he's like, "Whatever you want, just come on board." Which I thought was kind of crazy, but it's on brand for him. And then I talked to Bill Hellman, the other founder of EO Ventures. And Bill spent 35 years at Greylock, 15 of those as managing director. So he's a legend in the venture capital space. And when I went to my first meeting with him, I was like, "Sir, I do not understand why you want me for this job. I have never invested before. I don't know anything about investing. Surely you can find somebody who's more qualified than me." And he looked at me and he said, "There's some stuff you're going to have to learn." He's like, "But you can do it. You're smart. You'll figure it out." It's not that much. He's like, "Really, this is a business about picking people, and you know how to do that." And I just thought it was so wild for me that this titan of the industry could think that an old woman like me could learn something new and be good at it, right? And I loved rolling from before. I was like super intrigued. So I was like, "All right, I'll try." I was like, "I'll do this halftime for you guys." And now I'm like 80 hours a week deep in venture capital now. But as to answer your question, I think what has like turned my optimism around is just like every day I meet with founders who feel like they're going to change the world through what they're building. And, sometimes I'm like, I love the founder, or don't love the idea, or love the idea, don't love the founder. But like every now and again, I'll meet someone who I'm like, "Holy crap, like you're going to be able to do this. You are going to be able to change the game with what you're building." And that's what has like sparked my enthusiasm back up again. Cause some of these folks are just like, they're tremendous people. They have ideas that are phenomenal. They need the capital to execute. And like, we are like down for that journey with them.
It's amazing what being exposed to little pockets of people who are doing amazing things can do to completely change your mindset. I remember, Matt, you've run your youth entrepreneur contest for several years. And just a couple of weeks ago, you asked me to come and be one of the panelists for these final pitches. And these three kids, they're like, how old were they, Matt? Like 15, 16?
15, yeah.
Their businesses that they already have built that they're running and their pitches. It's like, you can't, even though it's just three kids, I'm like, if it is possible for there to be 3 15-year-olds in this country who are doing what they're doing, then my optimism for the future just like went through the roof. Even just 3, it's like the fact that they can even exist is such a good sign. So being in venture capital, I imagine just seeing those pitches, even though not all of them are great, it's such a good exposure and reminder that, yeah, there's a lot of tough stuff out there, but there's so many great minds,
Absolutely. Like just yesterday, I met with 2 founders. They sent me the deck. I think it was like a cold outreach or something like this. I looked at their deck and they had their pictures. I think they must have been from their senior prom from high school. I'm not joking. Like, and I looked at the deck. I'm like, these are 12-year-olds. Like, you can't give millions of dollars to 12-year-olds. But we decided to meet with them, just hear what they had to say, and it was like impressive. I was like, "Holy crap!" I can know, because I used to do a lot of meetings. And I'm like, okay, after 20 minutes, you kind of get the notion. You're like, but I sat there this meeting with them. I was like, this is impressive stuff. Like they had it all thought out. They had a really clear thesis, like the plan. I was blown away. And so it's those kinds of experiences, to your point, Isaac, that is just like make this job so fun and fulfilling.
Okay, so I'm gonna bring us home with a little bit of a future looking question, or your prognosis on the education industry. At various points, some new thing happens in the world. The internet comes about and everyone's like, okay, this is going to be the thing that totally transforms public education. And it kind of does, but it's not quite as radical as maybe people thought at first. Is it different this time? Are we in what? Because I feel like since COVID, something accelerated. It's not like a new technology was created in 2020, but the fact of people having this experience of doing virtual school or just not being in school for a while, and all of a sudden what parents thought was possible and what they wanted shifted, like consumer preference shifted in a massive way or something. Now you add, there are some technological advances, AI and things. I mean, even just video conferencing. Let's be honest. In 2020, a lot of people didn't even know that you could video conference with 50 people at once. Like, even though you could for 5 years before that or more, but like it was still kind of new. So I feel like we're at a point where even the stodgiest public school systems that have been set in their ways and all the incentives are for that are kind of being forced to change because they're losing enrollments, and they're like, it feels like there's something happening where there actually is an opportunity for some really big changes across the board in education. Do you feel that? Is this really something big, or are you like, there'll be some innovation around the edges, but we're not talking transformation?
So I'm going to tell a quick little story first, and then I'm going to answer the question. So I have been really interested and focused on AR and VR in education since I came on board at the firm. And so I had an early conversation with Bill where he was like, Michelle, people have been telling me that VR is right around the corner for 30 years. And guess what? It was never around the corner. He's like, he didn't tell me to like stop doing anything, but he was just like, so just keep that in mind, right? Because he's like, if every time I got on an airplane, I saw like one or two people with the goggles, then I would think maybe something was happening. He's like, but I don't see it. And I, that made sense to me, right? So I was like, okay. But then I continued to sort of look into this, and I read this news story about the top draft pick in the NFL. Right, it was this kid who like had learned to become good, right, with through virtual reality. And so I started talking to people in the field, and somebody said to me, like, you should really just start asking people who have kids, like, what do they know about VR? And it was fascinating because every single parent said back to me either, yes, they have a headset, or they don't have one, but they're bugging the crap out of me for one, right? I was like, huh? And then like the data came back, it was like 30% of kids have a headset, 50% have used one, right? And only 20% have no clue what it is. So I think that there are several things right now that might very well sort of come together and create the perfect storm of like a significant and catalyze a significant change in the equation. And I think the sort of AR VR piece is fascinating, and that could be one. I think ESAs, right, educational savings accounts, and the fact that more and more states are adopting them and more families are utilizing them. And then obviously AI. And I think because of those three factors, putting a lot of pressure and bringing innovation in a different way to the equation, I think very well could set us down a wildly different path over the next few years.
Yeah, I have I don't know, I've been interested in and around education for my whole career as well, and have never really felt, when it comes to higher ed, I've had moments where I'm like, oh, the whole thing's going to be changed. And, but K through 12, I've just never really had that feeling like, there's always going to be some reforms. There'll be some vouchers in addition. There'll be some this and that. But just in the last few years, it's like, I never would have thought 15 states in a single year could all do an ESA, or, I mean, even just parents that I talk to at my kids' little league or whatever, before COVID, maybe 1 out of 20 would say something like they're thinking about something different for school. Now it's literally like 3 out of 5 say something like it's the majority of them are like, we're thinking about a hybrid school, or we're thinking about like, there's just this willingness and this desire for something different from the consumer side that I haven't seen before. So I'm with you, and you are positioned to invest in all of those cool new things that come along.
That's right. So if you're building in this space, hit me up. I think that we're, to your point, like, I think we're at an incredibly important time. And I think that there's this huge opportunity to build things that could significantly move the ball forward for kids and the quality of education that they're getting. And that's, that's part of the reason why Equal Opportunity Ventures exists, so that we can make sure that we support ideas and founders and bring those things to fruition and, and see massive economic mobility for the populations that we're focused on.
I love it. Michelle, this has been amazing. I feel like we could just listen to your stories endlessly. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us on the podcast.
Absolutely. It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Michelle.